Hello, today's book is from Portuguese literature, a classic, Amor de Perdição by Camilo Castelo Branco. When you mention this book to Portuguese people, the immediate reaction you get is, oh, that's Portugal's Romeo and Juliet. And it's true, it's a book about forbidden love between two houses that are feuding, and it ends tragically. But does that really make it Portugal's Romeo and Juliet? That's what we're going to discuss today. Okay, so just in case there's somebody out there in the English-speaking world that wasn't required to read Romeo and Juliet in school or in college and hasn't seen any of the, I don't know how many Hollywood movies have been made based on it, let's start with a short recap of Romeo and Juliet. Two households, both alike in dignity, in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. From ancient grudge, break to new mutiny, where civil blood makes civil hands on clean. For never was a story of more woe than this of Romeo and Juliet. Oh, right, a recap, sorry. Okay, so Romeo and Juliet, here's the basic story. The Montagues and the Capulets are two noble houses in Verona, in the Italian city. And they have been feuding for so long, the story doesn't even tell us when it started, only how it ends. At the opening of the story, there has nearly been a fight between some of the sworn men between the two houses, and the local prince threatens to execute the next person who breaks the peace. At the opening of the story, Romeo, the son of Montague, is depressed and sulking over his unrequited love of Rosalind. In an attempt to divert his attention, his cousin, Benvolio, convinces him to sneak into the Capulets' ball. Romeo agrees, hoping to see Rosalind. Instead, he meets Juliet, and Rosalind is swept from his mind. Now, the ball is for Juliet's benefit, to let her see Count Paris, the man her father wants her to marry. But of course, she only has eyes for Romeo. Juliet's cousin, Tybalt, sees through the Montagues' disguise and is enraged that their old enemy is at the ball. But Juliet's father orders him to keep the peace because he doesn't want to see bloodshed at his ball. Plus, the prince threatened to kill the next person that broke the peace. So after the ball, while the others make their way home, Romeo climbs the wall into the Capulets' mansion, and the famous balcony scene unfolds where the two express their love for each other. They are secretly wed the next day. Tybalt, meanwhile, seeks out Romeo, challenging him to a duel. Romeo refuses, knowing that Tybalt is now his kinsman. Tybalt, of course, doesn't know this. Romeo's friend, Mercutio, accepts the duel on Romeo's behalf and is killed. Romeo kills Tybalt in revenge and is then exiled from the city. But not before sneaking into Juliet's chamber and spending the night with her. Juliet's father decides to marry her to Paris. Juliet refuses. What else can she do? She's already married and slept with Romeo. Her father is enraged. So Juliet goes to Friar Lawrence, who performed the secret marriage, and he gives her a sleeping draught that will cause her to fall into such a deep coma that she will be declared dead. He promises that he will send a message to Romeo to come save her. Of course, the message doesn't make it in time. Thinking Juliet is dead, Romeo buys poison and goes to her grave. There he fights and kills Paris, drinks the poison, and dies. Juliet wakes up to find her lover dead and takes her own life as well. In the end, both families gather at the grave, and seeing the folly that has been wrought by their long feud, they agree to set it aside and try to live in peace. Modern readers, on the internet at least, seem to have one of two reactions to the story of Romeo and Juliet. Oh, it's such a precious story of true love. Girl, she's 13, he's 14. In the space of 72 hours, they meet, get married, have sex, and commit suicide. They're impulsive teens. Both of these reactions, I think, miss a major point about the story, though the second is a little closer to the truth. The point that people seem to miss about Romeo and Juliet is that it's a tragedy. We say it's a great love story, and what we mean is it's a great story, and it's a love story. There's love in it. So it's a great love story, but it's not a story of great love. It's like all classic tragedies in Shakespeare and even just in classic literature in general. Tragedy is driven by the character's own flaws. We already know in Romeo and Juliet that Romeo is over-emotional because of how he reacts to his love for Rosalind. He's driven by his flaws, just as every character in the book is driven by his flaws. We know their actions are going to end badly, but we also understand that each person is acting in a way that makes perfect sense for them. That is the secret sauce that drives classic tragedies, and even some modern ones, but especially classic tragedies. That's what makes tragedies tick, is the fact that the people are doing what you know they're going to do, and you know it's going to end badly, but they can't see it. Now this brings us to our new book, Amor de Perdição. So Amor de Perdição was written by Camillo Castelo Branco in 1861. It tells the story of Simão Botella, or perhaps in English Simon, and his long love affair with his neighbor, Teresa de Albuquerque. It opens as follows. Domingos José Correri Botello de Mesquita e Menza. That is all one guy's name. That's how Portuguese are, at least at this time. Fidalgo de linagem de uma das más antigas de Villarreal e tras os mountains, era em 1779, jus de fora de Cascais, e nesse mesmo ano casará com uma dama do Passo, Dona Rita Teresa Margaride Preciosa de Vega Caldeiro Castelo Branco. All of that, another name. Filha de uma capital de cavallos, neta de outra, Antonio de Azevedo Castelo Branco Pera de Silva, tão notável pela sua hierarquia como por naquele tempo famosa, livro que escreva acerca de arte de guerra. That is all one sentence. Classic Portuguese authors are not known for snappy openings or short sentences. If you didn't follow that, don't worry. It doesn't really matter. Classic Portuguese authors are also known for writing a couple of chapters, or in this case, the entire first chapter, just telling some backstory. In this case, the story of Simão's parents, and it has little import to the rest of the novel. But that's the way they roll. At the outset of the novel, Simão has a bit of a wild streak. He is 15 and studying in Coimbra. His older brother writes home to inform his father that Simão has spent most of the school money on a pair of pistols. He is running around at night and causing trouble. But as soon as Simão arrives at home, we quickly learn that there's a little more to this wild streak. He is running around with plebes, or in other words, commoners. His first trip home is cut short after an incident with one of the servants. The servant was leading a horse to the fountain to drink when, due to a lack of caution or by chance, the horse knocked over and broke an expensive vase. The owners of the vase had the servant publicly beaten. Simão, coming across the scene, intervenes, driving the men away with his riding crop. His father, a judge, threatens to have him arrested, but his mother gives him money and sends him back to Coimbra, while she tries to smooth things over with his father. He returns to Coimbra, arrogantly convinced of his valor. His problems continue at school. This is during the time period when the French Revolution is slowly collapsing into chaos and Napoleon is rising to power. There's various revolutionary forces that are active in the academic environment of Coimbra, and Simão is involved. He ends up getting arrested by the campus police and spends 6 months in jail, missing an entire year's worth of classes. His father forces him to return home to Viseu, and both parents despair about his future. However, over the next 3 months, a strange change comes over Simão. He rarely goes out, except to take his youngest sister for walks in the park. He becomes very studious, and he will soon return to Coimbra to complete his studies. Shortly before he leaves, we learn the reason for this change. He's fallen in love. He saw Teresa de Albuquerque through his window, which looks across the street into her house. And they have been writing each other's letters ever since. There's just one small problem. Her father hates Simão's father. The judge ruled against him in the past, and he's kept a grudge ever since. Well, there's another small problem. The men that Simão drove off from beating the servant were men that belonged to the house Albuquerque. So he also dislikes Simão. The only person who believes in the two lovers and is helping them is Simão's youngest sister. So Simão has a plan. He is going to Coimbra to earn an education and means of sustaining himself and Teresa so that they can marry regardless of what their respective families think. Unfortunately, not long after both sets of parents become aware of this courtship, Teresa's father hatches a plan of his own. Believing his daughter's love is merely a teenage infatuation, he convinces her cousin, Balazar, that he stands a chance of marrying Teresa if he can just sway her with his charms. When he fails, Balazar turns his attention to making sure Simão can't get too close to Teresa. Teresa's father gives her an ultimatum: marry Balazar or be sent away to the convent. She says, send me to the convent. Eventually, the feud between Balazar and Simão ends up with Balazar dead and Simão banished to India. Teresa is sent to the convent and soon after commits suicide. Or it's kind of vague in the story. She's on the Miradora, the Outlook, and sees him go by on his way to his 10 years of exile in India, and she's dead. Hearing of her death, Simão dies of a broken heart. Well, he mostly dies of a broken heart. He also has a bullet wound that he sustained during this feud that has never quite healed right, and he just kind of gives up and he gets a fever and he dies. So it's basically the same thing. Amor de Perdição is a great book. It's often considered the best by the author and one of the best of its time period. It's perhaps not the timeless classic that Romeo and Juliet is, but so be it. It's still very good. It's also a fundamentally different story in two important respects. If Romeo and Juliet is a great story about love, Amor de Perdição is a story about a great love. There is nothing impulsive or fickle about Simão or Teresa's love. Simão can be reckless at times. This is definitely true. But his motives are far less selfish than Romeo's. If you want a love to hold up as good love, this story has Romeo and Juliet beat by a wide margin. The two exchange letters. They have a much deeper connection than what is going on in Romeo and Juliet. And yeah, so it's just a better story in that respect. But there's something more. This book is also a tragedy, but it's a modern novel. 1861, but still modern. And it's a different kind of tragedy. The tragedy of Shakespeare is driven by the characters and the character flaws. In Amor de Perdição, the characters have their flaws, but it's not really about their flaws. They are trying to do the right thing. especially Simon. He has definitely the flaw of being overly impulsive at times, but he's definitely an honorable character. There is a whole second subplot involving the man that he's staying with and her daughter falling in love with him. But he is always quite clear that he is faithful to Teresa, and he, is very honorable about his intentions. And so you can't say that what happens to him is because of his flaws. Rather, it's just that in the modern age, we are starting to realize that sometimes that's not enough. That sometimes the characters are doing the right thing, but the situation, the society is just wrong. And that is a very different kind of tragedy, one that we see increasingly in modern novels, and it's very interesting to see it coming up here in 1861. So that's my short analysis of Amor de Perdição. Okay, so let's talk about the language in Amor de Perdição. It is one of the most difficult Portuguese books I've read so far. And despite my level in Portuguese, I'm pretty proud of myself for getting through it. That said, it's not the most difficult book in Portuguese by a long shot. Most Portuguese people will have read this book in high school, just as many American and British people have read Romeo and Juliet. There are two things that make the book really difficult for us non-native speakers. First, there is Portuguese literary style. There is a lot of complexity to Portuguese grammar, but most teachers will assure you that they're rarely used outside of literature. However, literary writers seem bound and determined to make up for this fact by using every flourish they can. Take an example of direct and indirect object pronouns. In English, we have a strict word order structure that tells us it should go subject, verb, object. So the direct object pronoun goes after the verb. Now, Spanish, on the other hand, likes to mix things up and say things like te amo, you, I love, okay? And in Portuguese, it depends. The usual order is the same as English. But there's a lengthy list of magnetic words that mysteriously change this word order. So, for example, we would say amo te, I love you, but we would say não te amo, no you I love. Just go figure. And then sometimes to make things extra spicy, we can take these pronouns and attach them directly to the verb form, and sometimes even in the middle of the verb. So, for example, in this book, the Simão says to Teresa, ver nos imos. Ver, to see, is in the first person plural. We will see. Veremos. But with us thrown in the middle of the word to make a single word that means we will see each other. In the future, ver nos hemos. That is how Portuguese rolls. So it's not that simple. The other thing that makes it hard is the time period. It's set in the early 1800s, and there are numerous words that just aren't common anymore. For example, the men carry clavinas, and I don't think there even is a translation. In short, it's an early gun. It's like a musket, but it's not. It's a clavina. And I searched dictionaries online and Google Translate for a long time before eventually entering the word clavina into Google Images and seeing one. And then it made sense. So that's what you're up against. Should you read Amor de Perdição? Well, let's break that down into two questions. Should you read it in English? No. And I'll tell you why. I haven't read it in English. There is one English translation. It is called Love of Perdition. And that's a terrible translation. I've not read the book. I've seen reviews that say it's a bad translation. But just from that title is so badly translated. That is literally what Amor de Perdição means if you put it through Google Translate, which is probably what they did with the whole book. And just put it through Google Translate and clean it up a little bit and say good enough. I would not translate it like that at all. I would say love of the lost, love of the condemned, any word but perdition, which is a very clunky word in English and does not at all capture what the author was going for with the title. So in English, I would say no. Should you read it in Portuguese? Probably eventually. It should not be the book that you decide to learn Portuguese to read, though maybe if you want to, that's fine. But it's not, and it shouldn't be the first book you tackle in Portuguese. But if you want to understand European Portuguese culture, eventually, yeah, this is one of the touchstones of their history and their culture. There's been several movie adaptations in Portuguese, so maybe watch one of them if you're better at listening to Portuguese than reading it. So eventually, yes, it is a good challenge for somebody who wants to master Portuguese, but probably not a sole reason for learning Portuguese. And that is my final analysis of Amor de Perdição. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like and a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe if you want to see what's next. And I will see you next time on the Polyglot Bookshelf.